One of the most interesting things we did, I think, was called Twilight Gods, and it was an opera in a parking garage. So it was completely staged in an underground parking structure in Chicago underneath Grant Park. And people would drive through in their cars and actually drive through the entire thing. So they would park at one location, and then the scene would unfold in front of them and around them, and the music would come through their car speakers, and they'd be able to listen to it that way. And then they'd just be sort of guided through this scene to scene through this opera.
Welcome to an interview episode of Tech in the Arts, brought to you by the Arts Management and Technology Lab at Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Victoria Sprouse, the podcast producer, and today I'm talking to David Nutt, who has worked at the Los Angeles Philharmonic and Chicago Symphony Orchestra before landing in his current position as the Director of Sales and Advertising at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. David, thank you for being here.
Of course, so happy to be here.
So I know everyone's sick of talking about COVID, but I am going to bring it up. How has COVID and the move to digital performance during the pandemic changed the marketplace for opera and orchestra programs? Have you seen a return to normal in this past year, or what's it looking like out there?
Well, it's changed a lot in a lot of ways. Short answer, has a return to normal? No.
Okay.
But, yeah, I mean, so, it's changed the demand overall. There's a lot less demand out there for tickets for operas and symphony concerts. And then, I think that's going to take some time to build back. I think it's going to take a few years. That, when operas and symphonies rely on the kind of subscription model still, taking a big hit in subscriptions kind of all at once, it's going to take a long time to rebuild because you have to, sell that many more individual tickets. So that's a big way. The other way I think is just like marketing strategy. With the shift to remote work, and a lot less people commuting, a lot less people coming down into a busy downtown area like where Lyric is located, has a lot of, far-reaching effects.
It's less in their direct line of sight every day. It's kind of
right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's so much less foot traffic downtown, so a lot of things we would do normally to advertise are not as effective or not even happening anymore. And then other effects that I think we're still kind of figuring out, like, are people, if people are commuting less, that means they're driving less in their cars. Maybe they're listening to the radio less. And then I think like the third way would be just the virtual performances. A lot of companies are doing virtual recordings of their whole performances. People can watch. Lyric is one of those companies. And I think to some degree, people kind of expect some more online engagement, more virtual options, which has been great, can reach a lot more people. There's people who used to come all the time that can't come anymore. And now they can actually watch the operas, and gotten so many comments about how excited they are about that, how happy they are about that. On the other hand, I think with the virtual performances, it's been, those are extremely expensive to put on. So that's kind of the other side of the coin, is that like it's extremely involved production with multiple camera angles and multiple people behind the cameras, selecting the scenes and figuring out how to use that going forward. And if it's viable, I think is something that we're all still figuring out.
So you were talking a little about the marketing and less foot traffic downtown. So I've heard that there are two types of marketing, introducing people to your product and reminding people that your product is there. Do you focus on one more than the other? And has that changed? How have you tried to introduce new customers to the various arts organizations you've worked for?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I think any good like marketing department focuses on both and does both. And I think there's a couple levels of like introducing people to your product when it comes to the arts. I think there's like, introducing people who have no familiarity with the art form, to the art form in general. And that I would say is more of like a long-term investment that, is really more in the hands of community engagement department, education, bringing in kids and actually, exposing them at a young age. Like, we know from the data that adult participation in the arts is highly correlated with exposure at a young age. And so I think, most big arts institutions and even smaller ones are making that long-term investment by, doing those type of programs. We do a little bit of that on the marketing side, like with, I think, content marketing that's sort of more general and aimed to just give people, kind of an intro to the art form. But yeah, I think overall that's kind of more on the engagement education side. But then there's, I think, introducing people to your product who are already familiar with opera, right? So people
Right.
who are kind of already participating, already going to the symphony, or going to the arts museums, or coming to see opera maybe in other places. Those are kind of your best prospects, really. Those are the people we always aim to try to bring in, because they're more likely to convert.
Yeah, so with that last question, what do you find is the main role of social media in marketing for the arts? Are there tools that are better for acquiring versus retaining audiences?
I think like the goal with social media is when it's functioning well, it's to create a community online and to create a space for conversations, for people to engage with each other about your product, and hopefully share with their friends and create kind of online word of mouth. I think that's kind of really the best case scenario for having like a well-run social media page. Of course, now it also functions really well for retaining people, because if you have someone's email address, it's pretty easy to find them on Facebook and follow them around with ads and promote posts to them, especially recent ticket buyers. Really effective tool to get them to come back.
So do you find you're mostly on Facebook then with social media?
Yeah, Facebook I think is really the biggest one now. We do Instagram as well at Lyric. I think that's pretty common.
With TikTok's rise in popularity, and we were just talking about Facebook, how do you find orchestras and their musicians balance professionalism with the casual qualities of advertising on online platforms?
Good question. Yeah, so Lyric actually just launched a TikTok account.
Ooh, okay, follow it, listeners.
Yes. I can't claim credit for any of that. It was really on the hands of my colleague Amanda Reitenbach. She's our manager of social media and content. And it was a really long process, because I know we wanted to be sure that we had plenty of content when we launched. And also I think an interesting thing about the process, starting a TikTok in an arts organization, is they wanted to be sure that they had buy-in all the way up to the board chair. The chair of our board signed off on the TikTok account.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just really important to get buy-in on it, and for people to understand that the content we're sharing on TikTok is not going to be shared other places, that it's exclusively for TikTok. I think that kind of helps assuage some fears about how it will be used.
About how you might look online, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and I think that, there's always that balance. You talked about balancing professionalism and the casual qualities. I think finding that balance is kind of about, embracing the form, embracing kind of how people use the platform and the language, but not forcing it, just still staying authentic to what your organization is. A lot of the videos that we've put out so far on TikTok have been a look backstage at the wig department, people creating wigs, or views from just on stage kind of right before a performance, things like that make a lot of sense, but are just kind of done in the TikTok style and that.
Yeah, I did an interview with Quincy Brown, who does PR social media for Broadway shows, and he was talking about how you can't just take clips of the performance and put it on TikTok. That's not really what people are looking for. They're looking for that value added, what am I gonna get by being on TikTok that I can't get by being at the performance even.
Yeah, that's a great point.
How does the community that the symphony or opera that you've worked in, that it's located in, how has that affected the marketing or advertising strategy that you implement? Yeah,
I think the community you're in really affects the marketing strategy, in every way imaginable, really. How dense is your population? That's going to affect, where you're advertising and how far out geographically you're reaching to bring people in. is your community, is your organization located in a community that's like a tourism destination? And, if that's the case, you're going to be wanting to incorporate that into your marketing strategy by, advertising further out, maybe all across the country, by partnering with organizations that are in the tourism industry, in your city. Really kind of any attribute of the population, that's in your community is going to affect your marketing strategy.
Yeah, I think actually when I was in LA, I think I went to the Los Angeles Philharmonic just to like see it. I don't think I went to go to a performance, but yeah, it definitely was on the tourist list. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because like symphonies everywhere have a problem with people coming once and then not coming back again. But I think especially there, it's like on people's bucket list, right? They want to see a concert at the Walt Disney Concert Hall,
yeah,
space. But then some people think about it. Okay, check did that. The challenge is how do you get those people to come back and be regular concert goers?
Yeah. Is there anything you've done or you've noticed like works better than other things you've tried at retaining audiences? Or
I think people really appreciate, kind of what you spoke to about what makes like a good TikTok page is, added like feeling like they're part of a family or like part of the organization. I think it's similar to the strategy that like a lot of fundraisers use in, feeling like they're part of the organization, they're contributing to its legacy. I think that also applies to subscribers because, they're making such an investment by buying a huge package of tickets up front, that are expensive. So I think when they feel like they're part of the organization, they have kind of that inside look and they're treated like, they're really a member of the organization. I think that plays a big role.
So if I was going to plan a marketing campaign for an arts organization, what would you suggest my first steps be in order to engage the community and drive people to the performance? I'm sure you are facing this every day with trying to drive people back to Lyric Opera of Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, first steps, I would say, is stepping back and figuring out your who, what, when, where, why, right? Your kind of all the reasons. SWOT analysis, if you want to get fancy with it. What are your strengths or what are the key selling points of the performance you're selling or the show you're selling? What are the things that are the most interesting about it to the most people? What are kind of the weaknesses of the show? What are the things that might turn someone off? And then, on your opportunities and threats, it's like, do you have any special opportunities to attract a new audience here with the show? Like for example, with Lyric, we just did the opera Fire Shut Up on My Bones, which is by the composer Terence Blanchard, who's also like a big, really famous jazz trumpeter, and did a bunch of film scores for like Spike Lee movies. So we had an opportunity there to say, okay, people who were interested in jazz but haven't tried the opera, that's a great segment to get to try their first opera, right? On the threat side, if we're doing a full SWOT analysis, a lot of time that has to do with like what else is going on in the market at the same time your show is going on. Like I remember when I worked at Chicago Symphony, there was one fall when the Cubs were in the World Series and there was a presidential election going on the same time that our season was starting.
I do remember that. The Cubs won, right?
They did.
Yeah, for like the first time in 100-something years.
Yeah, it was a really big fall. And it's really hard to get people to pay attention to, orchestra programs when all that's going on.
When everyone's so excited about the World Series, yeah.
Right, yeah, the World Series and watching crazy,
political, yeah.
So yeah, I think that's step one, and that's going to inform your key messages. Like, what is the main message you want people to take away when you're trying to get them interested in this thing that you're selling? And then step two or step three would be figure out what your budget is, and that's going to determine what you're going to be able to do with your marketing plan.
I'm just curious, generally, do you try to advertise more towards selling tickets for an entire season or individual tickets? Well,
so it's kind of all part of the cycle. So because we still operate on this subscription model, most of our sales come from, well, I don't know if it's most anymore, but a huge chunk of our sales come from subscribers. So that's like, a really important part of the sales cycle. And that's how it all kicks off, is put the season on sale and sell subscriptions for several months. and try to get as many people to buy packages as possible. And by buying packages, you get the best seats, benefits, all this kind of stuff. And that's what we really want people to do, is to buy a full package of concerts, obviously, because the cost of sale there is so much lower. But then, eventually you get to the point where you put single tickets on sale, and that is maybe more work than selling subscriptions.
Interesting.
With a smaller payoff, right? Because your cost of sale for selling one ticket is going to be way higher than the cost of sale for a subscription. But you have to do a lot of it, right? You have Lyric is over 3,000 seats in the house, and we'd have, many performances at the same show. So there's a lot of seats to fill.
Yeah. So having to sell 3,000 plus times whatever number of, that seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, for our musicals, it'll be, 20 or 30 performances.
So with trying to engage the community, are there any practices from COVID, like outdoor performances, anything like that you saw as successful or that you're going to continue to do?
So a big thing we did during COVID was make all of these virtual performances that we, in the beginning of the pandemic, we put them up on YouTube and just push them out, as far as they could go, because the idea was just to get as many people to watch it as possible, to keep people engaged with us, to keep Lyric in people's thoughts for when we eventually did come back. And I think, that strategy worked to an effect. We had, some great success with some of the virtual concerts that we did. And I think just putting them up there for free and just pushing them out was really, a good strategy in terms of just getting people's eyeballs on them. Looking forward, I think it's about, if we want people to watch them, but we also want to know who they are, and be able to bring them, try to bring them in for a performance in the actual opera house and to create a relationship with them. So I think, going forward, it's a question of how do we capture that information? Because if you just put it up on YouTube, you don't know who's watching it. And we did do some outdoor performances. There was some really fun stuff that probably won't continue after COVID. But one of the most interesting things we did, I think, was called Twilight Gods. And it was an opera in a parking garage. So
wow.
It was completely staged in an underground parking structure in Chicago underneath Grant Park. And people would drive through in their cars and actually drive through the entire thing. So they would park at one location, and then the scene would unfold in front of them and around them, and the music would come through their car speakers, and they'd be able to listen to it that way. And then they'd just be sort of guided through this scene to scene through this opera. And all in all, the whole experience was like under an hour. So you're really in and out. And that I thought was just incredible.
Yeah, that sounds so cool.
It was amazing. And I mean, it involved everyone in the company. Everyone, I was down there with those flashlight waiver things.
Like an airplane landing an airplane.
Yeah, exactly. So we were all down there in these jumpsuits with these, these flashlights directing people through the parking garage. Obviously something like that is insanely expensive to mount, and you can only have a very small number of people go through just because of capacity and because how long it takes to just drive a car through, the whole thing.
Yeah.
If there's another pandemic, we don't want
Yeah. So what is the best advice you have for orchestras or operas looking to increase their impact on the community that they're in?
I would say my best advice would be to do your research and not make any assumptions. I think there's a lot of value in just some broad market research that can be done. To broad surveying, bringing people in for focus groups, and just if you're trying to address an issue, maybe why aren't more people coming here? It's easy to make assumptions by just looking at the information you have and say, well, ticket prices are too high, or we're doing too much of the same programming. We did change it up, but maybe the answer is as simple as there's not enough parking here.
Yeah.
Right. So I think doing that research and putting in the effort to find out what people in your community actually think about you and how they engage with you, and then how they want to engage with you and what they kind of want from you is, I think, extremely valuable. And finding that sweet spot between, how can you best deliver on your mission and what are your strengths versus what do people in the community want from you, and how can you find kind of the best place where those two things meet up.
Well, great. That was very insightful. Thank you, David, and thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in the Arts podcast. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, send this to another arts aficionado in your life. You can let us know what you thought by visiting our website, amped-lab.org. That's amt-lab.org. Or you can email us at ampedlabcmu@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Tech in the Arts, or on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. We'll see you for the next episode.